All right, so another week. Tonight, I'll start off. I want to review a few things on the taxes, um, and also I'll discuss a little about the homework. On the homework, I put a little bit more of the question on there, at least so you can make sure you're on the right problem. I know people are using different versions of the textbook, different editions, so that's all good. But sometimes if there's a problem with the questions, I want to make sure you guys get off on the you know right start, right foot in terms of that. Um, let's look here. Just a quick review on the tax thing. This was what we were talking about again. This stuff is really important, and if you, like I say, use all the tools that are available to you. And again, I'm not telling you to, spend a whole ton of money on this stuff. Um, uh, Even if you, like you say, you do it yourself, you use a different program, you have somebody else do it. But if you want to know a little bit more about it for planning aspects or to double check the work of somebody else, these kind of programs are definitely available, and you don't pay for them, like I say, until you actually file. So that's kind of cool. This one's from some examples I was working on from a couple of years back, but they're still relevant, in here. The numbers are kind of the same. 18,000 mortgage interest. That's not unusual. If you when you're purchasing a home, especially, you all, where it's your first home and you're at the first part of the loan, you pay a ton of interest just because that's the nature of the way mortgages are done, right? You have, let's say your payment is, you know, uh, round numbers around 2,100 a month for a $380,000 home, something like that, where you didn't put much down, if anything, and you got a reasonable interest rate, for 4% or so. Um, you can expect out of that 2,100 bucks, probably about 1,800 of that is going to be your actual interest and principal. The other stuff, generally, the mortgage companies, they want to make sure that the taxes are paid, and they also want to make sure the insurance is paid. It's in their best interest because, to tell you the truth, they own the house. You may think you own it, but you're making payments, and they're the one left holding the bag if the house is, foreclosed on for lack of tax payment or burns down and is uninsured. So anyway, they will normally want to include that in your payment, and it makes it easy for you. That way, it's done in a single thing and single payment, and they have an escrow account set up for you. So anyway, of that $1,800 that is principal and interest, um, and again, these are just ballpark figures, but if you've just started paying on the loan, it may be something like, 1,700 bucks is interest and $100 is principal because that's just the way the loans are calculated. Now it's a 30-year mortgage, right? So out of the 30th year, um, it'll likely be just about the opposite, where only $100 is interest, and a whole big chunk of it is principal. Principal being the actual amount that's paying down the loan, not just servicing the debt. And so, you can listen to folks on the radio, and I'm not going to argue with them. There's a lot of people talk want to be debt free and all that kind of stuff. But again, think about the type of debt it is. And if it's real estate debt that's tax deductible and it's the asset that you're controlling that with is going up at a greater rate than the interest that you're paying on it, you'd be kind of foolish to pay it off too quickly. So, anyway, wealth is generated by investing, and if you want to double up on your house payments and forego other investments like, say, the stock market, um, that's just not a strategy I would do. But again, I'm more aggressive, but yeah, it's got to be within your risk tolerance. So I kind of make this speech every time, and then I'll look at the term papers, and everybody's way more conservative than I am, which is fine, and I don't downgrade them or whatever. They covered the list. They were smart with their money. They did 529 plans for their children. They did 401ks for themselves. They made all the smart moves, but I think they, might have uh, foregone, true wealth generation by perhaps being too conservative. So that's going to follow into tonight's lecture where we talk about banking options because a lot of these banking options, when they're paying you interest, but yet they're not keeping up with inflation, and also any of those yields are taxable. It's tough to get ahead with keeping your money in a strict savings account. So anyway, back to this one. We paid these numbers, or I placed these numbers. I just pulled them, whatever. Normally, you would get a 1098, a form, and you don't just wag these numbers. You're actually given, you just transfer block one to block one and yada yada and do that. But in this case, mortgage interest. So here I've taken them down to zero. So here the federal tax due is about $1,000. Here I'm basically telling them that I didn't get a 1098. I'm a renter and I owe damn near 5 grand. Oof. So anyway, I mean, there's a lot more that goes. There's a lot of moving parts. That the decision between rent and buy, and it depends on the market too. I would classify Alaska as a fairly stable market. Some places like Phoenix, Las Vegas, Miami, that is speculation. Those things go up and down. So before you buy a house in one of those places, you got to figure out where the market's going. And also this COVID thing is quite odd. If I owned real estate in New York City, I would be panicked. Um, there's a lot of folks that are number one learning how to telecommute and may not go back, and then there's a lot of the reasons why you'd live in New York City, restaurants and stuff that may not reopen or, you know, anyway, it may just be the big corporate restaurants that are able to survive and all the cool places that owned by, sole proprietors, they may be taken out. So anyway, I don't think in Alaska it's going to have that kind of dramatic impact on real estate, but some of the major metropolitan areas may take a hit. But places like Connecticut, places like, in fact, I know a guy who a friend of mine, he works for Google, has a home in Palo Alto, which is Google headquarters. It's probably not as nice as home as mine. Not that mine's that great, but I'm sure his is worth millions. And he's building up here and is going to just telecommute. So anyway, that's what's that going to do to Palo Alto home prices? They're so overinflated that may have an impact, and it may drive up prices. Not so much here, he's kind of a one-off, but places like Connecticut that are easily commutable from New York may have factors. So anyway, real estate is involved, but um, anyway, here's another one. What are we doing here? We took it down 1098, all zeros. I can't remember what I was trying to express here. Oh, and here I put so in this case, went from being owing money to putting some numbers in these boxes, and all of a sudden, boom, getting money back. So this is fairly consistent. From year to year, the numbers will change slightly, but mortgage interest and property, paid taxes are deductible. Student loan info. So let's say, you're paying on a student loan. Oh, this is good because it's going to be deductible. It's always been deductible for you. But remember how I said you were making 100,000 in this case? And guess what happens? Oh, it turns out you don't qualify. Your income's too high. So 80,000. Um, so again, I, I would hope most of you are able to get to that, you know, strata relatively quickly, but you're going to start seeing things that are going to drop off in terms of tax deductibility. So when a salesman or a you know whatever like, oh no, you want to do this because it's tax deductible. Mm, You need to know your own situation, and maybe you need to run the numbers or talk to somebody or do something. This one actually, this copy came free from my bank. But again, nobody's paying for it, not even the bank, until I actually pull the trigger. Um, Donations are always good. So this was back in 2018. There's no income limits typically on donations. So what do we do here? We gave nothing. Still have that 544 refund. And here we gave the amount. So again, if you look at the numbers and you did the math from the problem, you could actually figure out what tax bracket I'm in this case, with that $100,000 income based upon the amount my taxes owed changed. So yeah, you might have to put in more details. Another thing I mentioned a little about, being able to write off, like, say, I guess I was talking about my Forerunner. Um, there's also, you'll hear about, a state being declared a, you know, whatever, disaster area. Um, yeah, there's ramifications. California wildfires. Oh my God. Yeah, that is a disaster. A man-made disaster. I don't mean global warming. I mean, I spent my youth cutting trees and working controlled burns in California, and they quit that program. Go figure. How'd that turn out for them? Not good. Um, all right. Now we're going to talk about banking and interest rates. Um, so my main point is that banks, especially, after tonight's lecture, banks are very useful in terms of being a place to, work out your financial life for convenience, but they're not a place where you want to keep a lot of money because the interest rates, even though they're pretty secure up to a quarter million bucks, um, you're it just from a financial perspective, it doesn't make sense because again, the yields that you're getting are not going to keep up with inflation, and they're not, you know, it's like treading water and you're adding more weight to yourself every year. Eventually, you're going to sink, or the buying power of your money is going to be less. And what you're trying to do is increase wealth, not decrease it. So savings institutions, there's been a whole ton of deregulation that happened, in previous generations. This stuff is getting sold, and this book is making reference to things that really don't exist so much anymore. With the banking deregulation, a lot of banks now are able to do, or credit unions or whatever. It's more of a branding issue. It used to be that credit unions, could only do certain things, and banks could only do other things, and then there were savings and loans. And now it's just kind of, I mean, you can get like USA that, companies also kind of have a lifespan. USA used to be a great company. Now they're kind of mediocre. But anyway, those guys can do pretty much anything for you in terms of insurance and banking and credit cards, and then they're kind of a front for other companies that they don't actually even control, but you can still, go through them, so it has the appearance of being sort of seamless. Anyway, that didn't used to be the case. Certain, there was definitely a difference between a savings loan and a credit union and a typical bank, and now, common affiliation. If you basically walk in off the street, it used to be, there was like a teacher's credit union where you had to be a teacher's. I haven't seen one of those type. There probably exist, but Alaska USA is a credit union, and they're not turning away folks. Non-depository, yeah, finance companies. Anytime you see a finance or anymore, that's got to be a fairly pejorative term. Anyway, maybe using it incorrectly, but it's not a name that, if you're going to household finance was one of the big companies, and they're not much different than, payday loans and the rest of them. Usually pretty high rates. there's a certain laws called usury, right? Usury means that if say a bank wanted to give you a loan and they're going to charge you 18% interest, well, in most states that would be considered usury, right? That's a crime, but there's exceptions. There's ways around it. And for example, credit cards um, are often from Delaware. Delaware's a very corporate friendly state, meaning not so good for a consumer, but very good for a credit card company. And so, this gets again political. Again, there's a lot of that's Joe Biden's home state, and a lot of those credit card companies um, charge rates that would be illegal in most states, but because they're located in Delaware, where that is legal, they can do business, and they can do business up here in Alaska and other places. Um, so yeah, you lose out on a bit of protection. But if you're in general, if you're going to a finance company, um, this is not like a brokerage company. This isn't a mutual fund company. This is a anyway. Somewhere along the line, your financial situation probably took a bad turn, and ended up at a almost a lender of last resort. Um, and then securities firms. So these organizations too have gotten huge. We're talking Fidelity, Vanguard, Ameritrade, somebody like that, and um, they also, they can offer credit cards and bill pay services and all that kind of stuff. I generally, do not take advantage of those type of banking related services with the securities firms, the brokerage things, because I don't want much traffic on those accounts. Everybody will have their own strategy, but a good strategy that's worked for me is to keep all the volatility in, you know, uh, um, a bank. So for example, I've got Alaska USA and USA and a couple others, and you end up, based upon needs, if you're in business, sometimes to have different banks for different reasons. USA cannot do business banking, so in order to have business banking, in order to have a ability to deposit large amounts of cash and small bills, I need a local bank. So, um, but I've done business with a number of the local banks, and tell you the truth, I'm not favorably impressed with really any of them at this point. But anyway, I'm not looking to make money from interest from a bank, nor I'm looking for some security, but the only way I can really be protected because, money, small transactions are going in and out of those accounts. The only way to really be protected from fraud is to anytime the amount in those bank accounts gets to a certain level, I try to transfer it to the brokerage account where any fraud or identity theft would be very transparent because it would be very abnormal to have money coming out of the brokerage in my case. So anyway, and then insurance companies, yeah, insurance companies, and they lump them into this banking sector, but um, yeah, you need insurance, but to invest with insurance companies is again not something I'll do for a variety of reasons, and we'll go into that later. But again, I know you can get some limited forms of insurance through Alaska USA and USAA, another the big bank that I deal with down in Texas. They do all types of insurance. They're primarily an insurance company, so there's a lot of crossing of the lines. Is what I'm trying to say. And then um, investment companies. So the difference between investment companies and security firms, uh, don't worry about this kind of stuff being testable because it's just OBE. It's overcome by events. Things have blurred to the point where there's not meaningful distinctions because most things are now financial conglomerates, right? B of A, Citigroup. They do a lot of business in a lot of different realms. So trying to parse it out is not that useful. Now again, just because B of A probably could do brokerage things for me, I would not want that. I want that, you know, physical separation between my accounts. I lose B of A cards. The Alaska Airlines card is a Bank of America product, and I go through one of those about every 5, 6 months, and they're good about it now. They'll alert me to the fraud. Last week, somebody tried to buy $7,000 worth of hand sanitizer. I mean, obviously it was a front company, but actually it was 7,900 bucks. So they just decline the charge and give me a call and they overnight me a new card, and it just moves on. It's just kind of a hassle, but um, I would not want large sums of money and it's not B of A's fault, but it would be my fault if I kept all my money in one place when I know, it's subject to identity theft. Um, Conglomerate, yeah, that's all they're trying to show is that, one company do a lot of things. Again, not a lot of testable information on that stuff. That being said, too, when we get to the midterm, um, we will do a review beforehand, a video review where I'll actually have the test in front of me, and it'll be whatever, 40 questions or something, and I'll be able to go through and not read you the question, but give you a pretty good idea so you can narrow down your study. So don't be overwhelmed. Checking services. So yeah, checks are kind of funny. Writing checks. I've had some foreign students, back in the good old days when we actually, were able to teach in person. And I think he was a Finnish student, and he stopped me afterwards because he was embarrassed. He's like, I don't get it. Why are there checks? And it's a good answer. I mean, a good question. It's just you don't see them in other countries. When you go to Europe, they don't do checks. Um, I do standing transfers, which are like ACH debits. I think it's automated clearinghouse transfers, where you just, it's almost like a debit thing. Over there too, everything's chip and pin, where you use your debit card, but then you need to enter your PIN. So I guess that's the same as it is here now. Um, but even a credit card normally has a PIN associated with it, so it's a little different, but it's a little more secure. And also it's a cultural thing. Like in Germany, for example, I think this is changing, but it was viewed if you can't pay cash, then you're somebody of limited resources. So it was like, oh, he has to use a credit card because he, can't afford it. So, but now I think you see more credit cards. But anyway, um, anyway, but checking accounts are made for a lot of movement in and out. They're demand accounts. Um, any of these banks, they always set up a checking and a savings, but they can skip the savings in my mind. I never would want to save money, any kind of large sum with a bank because as we'll go through the interest rates, they're just not competitive. So, paying bills on times, yeah, paying bills after the deadlines, making late payments, ignoring rules, lease cost. Anyway, yeah, there's lots of ways to get, you know, in trouble. And this whole notion of leasing a car, again, they do that quite a bit in Europe, but over here, the financial aspects of that, um, I tracked this a little bit, and it's never ever made sense to for me to lease a car. I mean, you're on a long-term rental. I guess if you're going to flip a car every couple 3 years, it might make sense, but anyway, that's just not a great strategy. Checking accounts, debit cards tied to your accounts. So debit cards are essentially like a check, but the problem with the debit card is one, some of the fraud protection isn't the same as a credit card. So a lot of times banks will give you the same protection as a credit card, but legally they don't have to. So if you get in a squabble with them, It can go ugly. Banks will often, when your credit card gets abused or whatever, oh, we're going to refund the money, and they act like they're doing that because you're such a great customer. Well, yeah, it's also required by law as long as you catch it, and there are limits. If you let it go over 30 days, uh, yeah, you're kind of screwed. If you catch it in the first day or two while it's still in the pending, oh, they're very happy, but their attitude changes considerably as it goes further, because then they have to be in like recovery mode to get it back. Yeah, these guys are getting with the 90s mobile now common. Anyway, you all, probably use Venmo, probably use PayPal. I'm not as big a fan of PayPal because the fees, but I'll take it. And Square, again, fees, but for you as the buyer, it doesn't matter as long as the merchant doesn't charge you some convenience charge. Um, Gaining popularity, yeah. So these guys, that's what I'm saying. It's been popular, and all these electronic transfers, electronic deposits. Obviously, if you're not taking direct deposit from your employer, with most employers, that's not even an option to get a check anymore. It's just a hassle. Okay. So recording your checks as you write them, yeah, that's where debit cards make this very difficult because you don't have that same register. I can remember growing up, my parents, being very methodical, but man, it's difficult. Reconciling your balance, yeah, make sure your statement agrees. Anyway, what you don't want to be doing is writing hot checks. You do not want to be writing checks that you don't have the money in your account for. There used to be a notion where, there was a float before you wrote the check and then it'd be a float of 3 to 5 days or whatever for the check to get to the bank. Now, they generally, if they will take a check, they'll usually scan that check too, and it can come out of your account right then. So it's very important that you have some sort of overdraft protection with pretty much any checking account you set up. Usually necessitates you having a credit card, but fair enough. Make sure they're not charging you an annual fee. And, if you don't want the credit card, just put it in a drawer or even cut it up or whatever. But you need that credit card account established so that if you overdraft, it goes on the credit card and not doesn't start this cascading, series of unfortunate events. They're going to cost you whatever $100 altogether because everybody can charge you a little fee and you wrote the hot check and you can't say anything about it, so it's not a position you want to find yourself in. So get overdraft protection because it will happen. Whoops. Check float. So yeah, this 2004. uh, this is like the seventh edition of the book and they're still talking about check float. Deters fraud. It changes the fraud. Different fraud. Now they've got electronic fraud. Credit card financing. So as long as you pay off your bill, within the period, and you got to look at the terms, but generally, pay off the bill in full by the statement date, and there will be no finance charges, and therefore you're a convenience user. And you have to have that kind of discipline. Another option is the debit card, and this is fine because it, just pulls it out of your checking account. So if you're afraid your credit card is going to get out of control, um, then maybe the debit card's the way you got to go. But I think the better strategy is to get some discipline and be a convenience user of the credit card, and that way you can, get your perks or your travel or whatever for free. Because let's say all you have is a debit card and you want to, and that, I don't know, you know, everybody does different things, but if you're going to try and travel and you don't have a credit card, it's going to be much more expensive and much more difficult. Trying to rent a car without a credit card is pretty awkward. Hotels, you show up with cash. It's no. So anyway, there's things you can use too, like I don't know, Hotwire or whatever the different types of services there are, depending on the time of year. You can get rental cars for quite cheap. But again, if you don't have a credit card, you can't do that. So you need a credit card. If you know, are concerned about your discipline issues, then just put it in a drawer somewhere and, use it. And, you can even go to a hotel and, put down the credit card for your bill and your incidentals. And then when you check out, tell them beforehand that you want to pay cash and, or put it on your debit card or something. But they want that ability to, the merchant wants that ability to have access to your credit card for their security, and their security equals generally a lower price to you. So necessity. Safety deposit box. You don't find, if everybody had a safety deposit box, there would be buildings with huge amounts of safety. Not that many folks have them. I guess the Alaska solution is more of a, fireproof gun safe. Um, ATMs, definitely. Um, Make sure though, this gets back to the homework assignment we'll have. If you're paying fees for your ATM, you're probably screwing up. Um, the competition is such that, um, for example, the bank in Texas, one of the downsides would be that you'd have to, use an ATM and then you're going to have to pay the fees, except they reimburse all ATM fees 100%, which is actually probably better than some of the local banks that would insist that you have to use the, you know, ATM in their network. And when you're in a restaurant or a bar or something, you use some private ATM, you'd have to pay for that. Anyway, um, a lot of banks will pay for all ATMs, which is a reason you might want to use that bank. Cashier's check. So what typically happens with a cashier's check is that when you write a check, right, you don't tell the bank you're writing a check, and so when that check shows up, um, the bank puts those funds against that check. Well, if you draw a cashier's check, you go to the bank ahead of time, they write the check for you, and they take the money out of the account at that time. So, and this was one of my problems with, well, I'll say the name, Alaska USA. I deposited a cashier's check I'd got from a gentleman who I sold a tractor to. It was 21 grand or something. And they said, "Oh, well, we need to put a hold on it," which is that's ridiculous. A cashier's check is like cash. It's already certified. So the reason they're putting a hold on it was to basically use my 21 grand for a couple 3 days without having to give me access to it. So anyway, I mean, you wouldn't normally find that on a bank in a market where there's much more competition. Some of the things they do like that, and I'm just singling them out, but I've had things with Northrim where I deposited cash and then paid a credit card the same day. They said, "Oh no, we got to put a hold on that for 2 days or 24 hours." It's ridiculous. Anyway, it's just ways that banks will try to hold your money for a little while because you may not think it's much, but if you've ever seen the movie Office Space where they talk about those little fractional pennies and how it adds up, um, one of the reasons I still had the bank in Texas is because the banks up here with direct deposit, which my military pay comes through, my military retirement, um, my buddy who coworker, he was getting his money through Navy Federal or USA 2 days earlier than I was. So the government was providing that bank the money, yet the bank wasn't making it available for me for 2 extra days, which is, anyway, just kind of a foul on my part. So I didn't like that. Money orders, um, again, if you're, kind of squared away in life, you shouldn't be dealing with money orders. Money orders are largely for people that are what you'd call unbanked, people that are for one reason or another don't have a checking account, don't have whatever. I mean, there are a few reasons to have money orders, like the goofy, I think it's the State Department with passports, they still want money orders. But I mean, if I get a money order, maybe once every 5 years, money orders are just not that big a deal. If you do end up having to get a money order, you can generally get them at the post office. You could, again, go to Walmart. Walmart caters to a lot of the unbanked folks. I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but they're trying to set themselves up as a provider for people who don't have regular banking services. So they have a lot of those, money transfer and money orders and other things. Traveler's checks. Um, yeah, unless I'd be curious if there's any students out there who've ever had any experience with traveler's checks. I mean, I haven't used a traveler's check in I I swear at least 30 years. I mean, most of you probably weren't even born. And the last time I was at a place, I was way in the middle. I think I was in Bulgaria or somewhere in Eastern Europe, and I was just yeah, I was using my credit card, and this other person, she had a traveler's check, and you know thought it was going to be universally accepted, and they'd never seen one before, so you know that's how it's supposed to work. That this is great for travelers, and it completely backfired. Traveler's checks, I think, are I've never traveled to a region where they're accepted um, over credit cards. Most places like credit cards or cash, but Geldemats, the ATMs in Germany and stuff, they work just fine with our system. So getting cash. Cuba's interesting. I've been to Cuba before, and you have to take cash there, but traveler's checks won't help you there either. You need cash, cash. All right. Criteria to select a financial institution. So this is what your homework's going to be on. You're going to, and I'm not trying to, again, I sound like I'm bad mouthing all these banks, but um, what works for me may not work for you. It depends what you're expecting out of a bank. But what I'm trying to, get you to look at is um, the convenience and the fees being charged. If you've got some local bank that's not charging you big fees, you're probably better off. But you need to figure out, kind of whether the grass is greener on the other side. And what you may find is that, other banks that are more aggressive or perhaps even more convenient are out there. And, we're kind of creatures of habit. You go to one bank because you've always gone to that bank, and you may find that that's no longer necessary. There's so many things too. I mentioned about, you know, depositing checks and stuff where you needed a local bank. Now with mobile deposits, and they keep increasing the limits, um, I would probably, if my bank in Texas would handle business accounts, I would probably switch everything to them. Paying bills online, yeah, sometimes it's easier. I have to do a lot of international wire transfers, and it's actually easier for me to do an international wire transfer with a bank in Texas than it is up here. Because up here I have to go into the location and I have to do all this paperwork and it takes extra time. There I can do it over the phone in 10, 20 minutes. So um, anyway, you'd think it'd be easier. Paying bills online, again, preaching the choir. You all probably do this better than the authors. Deposit rates and insurance. I'm not at all concerned about the interest rates that they're paying because I don't keep enough money in there to warrant it. And then fees. So some consumers using Walmart to avoid fees. Well, it depends what it is. I mean, Walmart cannot necessarily do everything for you. If you're somebody who's really down in that lowest tier where the $5 a month charge is significant, then yeah, maybe that might be a consideration. So interest rates and deposits affect your inflows and outflows. So if the interest rate is tied to say you need to have a $500 balance, then there's actually kind of a charge for that because you're keeping $500 in there, which isn't a great deal of money, but you're foregoing, a better interest rate from a brokerage or something because you're keeping that $500 in there. Now you would normally keep at least 500 or 1,000 as kind of a cushion, but just the same. Certificate of deposit, um, slightly better, still offered by a bank, but they usually want to, well, by definition, they want to keep it for a certain time. A CD is what they, certificate of deposit. But there's usually like a 1 year or 5 year period. And if you're willing to keep the money at that lower rate for a longer period of time, they'll give you a slightly higher interest rate. Whether that's good or not, I'll show you an example of something. Just some of the, and I'm not saying, all my stock picks are perfect, but you don't need to hit them all. You just hit a few and you're doing quite well. Risk-free rate of return. Um, Again, this is not going to be like the stock market in terms of up and down. It's going to be very predictable and it's going to be, little no risk. Risk premium. So now you're, trying to make a little bit of money, and so in order, risk and return is should be correlated. There are some very risky investments that don't have much in the way of return. So it can be a double negative, but all things being equal, you should be able to, if you're exposed to some risk, you should get a higher return. You should get a commensurate return. But then again, if you have no risk at all, don't expect much in the way of return. Banks make money by loaning it out at a higher rate. And if you have poor credit, yeah, expect to pay a higher rate as well because you represent more risk to them. Impact of the economy, again, something that's kind of beyond our control, but right now interest rates are quite low. Yeah, double up to catch up. Sometimes people, it's like they go to a casino and they lose money, so they start betting more to catch up. Um, but again, I more often see students, at least in the papers, they seem to be much more cautious than I think is wise. As you get further along in life, you've got less time to weather a downturn in the stock market or the economy. But if you're young, it's generally agreed that you can take a bit more risk because you've got more time for those investments to bounce back, and you don't want to be left on the sidelines when the economy is booming. Choice depends on risk tolerance. And you got to be able to sleep at night. No choice is right for all investors. So typically, the longer the money is held, the longer you're willing to commit to keep the money within a certain investment, the greater the return will be. Shifts in the yield curve. So most everything, these guys are acting like we're going to look at, newspapers and things like that. More and more, everything's just done electronically. Wall Street Journal obviously still exists, but the electronic form, but you've got interactive charts, so it's much better. Loan rates, you've got things like bankrate.com and some of these others that will compare bank rates across the entire sector. So rather than just giving you one institution, you can see how they compare. Monetary policy. So the Fed, the Federal Reserve, what they try to do, it's actually a private semi, governmental agency, but it's in private hands. It's controlled by the big banks, and they have, whatever boards of governors, they try to control the money supply. They try to set the interest rates, and they do have a fair amount of control. Don't get me wrong, but sometimes they overstate their power to really control things. And so that's how you end up with, zero interest rates to try and really, the theory being if interest rates are quite low, you're going to spur the government, you're going to spur investing and a lot of money is going to flow into the economy. And but they've, done it in some places where it's, Japan and I think Germany have got into negative interest rates where there's people still don't want to put money into the economy. So um, it's not perfect system. They don't have um, it's not a one-to-one linear control. They can try to manipulate the money supply, but it doesn't always work. But anyway, if somebody talks about the Fed, they're talking about the Federal Reserve, and Federal Reserve is largely sets interest rates. They set interest rates like at prime rates, which are what they consider risk-free investments. That's where one bank is loaning to another, where these folks have the resources where they're not going to default. You're never going to be able to borrow money at Fed, prime rates because you, as a consumer, represent, significantly more risk than a bank-to-bank loan. So this is what they do. They, increase the supply of funds, interest rates decrease. So they're saying more willing to expand, more willing to borrow funds, spending increases, and that's how it's supposed to work. Yep. But also you can have inflationary effects when you start to do that as well. The better way to do it is, have the economy do it itself. And so, you can't necessarily, bring a sick economy back to life if the underlying fundamentals are not there. So back to the homework plan. Yep, which ones are important to you and best banking characteristics for you. So we're talking all in the consumer banking realm. There's banks that have maybe a consumer presence like JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley or something like that. But a lot of times those banks are more the corporate banks that organize, stock sales and things like that for corporations. But in the consumer sector, like I say, we're really talking about convenience. We'll go through some of the numbers of what these banks can provide in terms of interest rates, but to save money with them, categorically, it's usually not gonna work. Um, so any of this interest rates now, when we're talking mortgages, that's huge because now we're talking a great deal of money, but that's not banking. Personal loans, yeah, and there's other options for personal loans. If you have a home, again, a benefit to having a home is being able to take a loan against the home. If it's used for purposes or maybe it's used for, you're actually using it to buy a boat, but you can, you know, money that you were going to use for repairs to the house can now be used from cash. And anyways, you can get yourself into some situations, but um, loans against the home equity are tax deductible and generate a lower interest rate than a personal loan. Also, if you have retirement accounts, you can take generally up to I want to say 50% if you've got a minimum 50,000. But I'll pull money in and out of my 401k accounts, not out of the accounts, but I'll take a loan against them quite often, and I don't do personal loans from a bank. Fees charged for checking services. I would prefer to pay no fees if I maintain the minimum balance. Anyway, most of the time I just suck it up and pay $5, and I'm not going to keep my balance is going to be what it is. Um, Location, if that's important. If you're doing just about everything online, that may not be a big deal. And if they're a nationwide kind of online bank, um, in order to compensate, just like the bank in Texas, what I'm talking about, where I don't have to go to the bank, their their branch, and in order to keep me as a customer, they give me quite a few more incentives. Um, Online and mobile is kind of the standard anymore, and ATMs. If you're paying fees for those, you really shouldn't be. So here are some interest rates. You know, so when you're looking at, they have a money market account, which would be an account that doesn't have you don't have to keep the money in there for a certain length of time. Whereas these CDs, these certificates of deposit, you can see the interest rates go up. If you're willing to commit for 5 years on the CD, you can get a whopping 2.4%. Considering that inflation is typically about 3%, you're only losing, 0.6%. That's not what I'm looking for in an investment. The fact that I'm mitigating my losses, um, and I got to tie it up for 5 years or pay penalties when I withdraw it early. Here, a savings account, just a straight savings account, 1.4. Here, 0.09. That's not gonna, you're not gonna, you know, make money with that. Here's inflation rates. So it can be higher. It can be whopping higher. If we went back to the Jimmy Carter years, 1970s or whatever, I was a pup, but that stuff was, I mean, we had mortgage rates that were double digits. We had huge issues. To say that interest rates or inflation ought to be about 3% typically is probably not that far off. Inflation has been quite low. Obviously, it'll be very low, like negative numbers if there's some sort of depression, recession going on. But anyway, if you're making, a whopping 1.4 on your savings, um, well, this year you didn't lose a lot of money, and this year you didn't. Here you lost. You're not getting ahead. And this is the other thing, the money that, let's say you did what I was saying, you keep just a minimal amount and you're not even looking at these savings rates. You're just keeping it in a checking account and you keep, I don't know, 4 to 6 grand in your checking account, maybe your emergency money or something else, or maybe you have your emergency fund in a different thing and you just keep a cash flow amount in your regular checking account and then you switch it over to this brokerage uh, firm where you have maybe your emergency account, let's say 6 grand or something in there, and then everything else you put in the stock market. If you were to do that, uh, over time, um, stock market, I mean, we're talking from way back when, turn of the century, it goes about 10% per year. So 1.4 versus 10%, it's not a tough thing. I tend to go with individual stocks. I'm just saying that this was from last year when I pulled this, or actually last term. So just an individual company, Shopify. But this was January 31st, 2020. Now, lots happened. We had the COVID thing, but this company was fairly well positioned for that. So the price, I bought this stuff way back when. But anyway, it was trading for 465 a share. And that was in January 31st of 2020. And here's today. So 914. So that's 100%. Anyway, is it going to keep up? Who knows? But what I tend to do is if I do make money in the stock market, I tend to peel that stuff off and put it into real estate because real estate is a lot more stable. But Shopify is sort of associated with, things like Amazon and other things where they help facilitate a lot of those transactions. So they were well poised, and they were way up above 1,000 there for a while. I think I got to, well, 1,024 there. So it, you know, it makes the 1.4 or zero point 0.4 or something look, silly. So now this could have, whatever. There's some skill and some luck in choosing stocks, but um, if you can work it out, you can do well. Okay, next on to managing your money. This is going to be very closely related to the banking that we talked about. And again, the way I would view banking is just as a mechanism to execute the transactions, to you know pay your bills, and just the convenience so that you can concentrate on other things. But in terms of a strategy, my strategy with banking is to keep minimal money with the bank and explore other things. So money management made over short term, cash flows, inflows, and liquidity, which we've discussed before. Liquidity has that ability to get at money quickly. Credit cards for utility, interest rates usually quite high. I again, I'm not really concerned with what credit card interest rates are because I aspire to be a convenience user, right? Pay it off every month. So I'm more concerned about the perks associated with a credit card. So can credit cards be part of your emergency fund? Probably so. I wouldn't say get rid of your emergency fund, but if you have your emergency fund, say with a brokerage account, it might take you a couple, 3 days to get the money out of the brokerage account. Whereas, if your car's broke and the transmission shot, you need, 3 grand or something like that. Put it on the credit card, and then that gives you till the statement closing date to pay off that credit card from the emergency fund, and then move on. And that was fairly convenient way to get through that little, burble. And now you build back up your emergency fund, and you have a credit card that's completely paid off and ready to go for the next issue. Um, Checking account, very liquid. Overdraft protection, talked about the importance of that. So again, have some sort of probably a credit card associated with that account or tied to that account so that you have that protection. But all this stuff, overdraft fees, bounce checks, it can add up in a hurry. Stop payment, not really a thing much anymore. You may have to do this. This goes back to this concept of the float. What you can do, and I've used this once, I think. Somebody, I sell agricultural equipment sometimes, right? And I sold somebody a bunch of horse stuff, and they'd written me a check, and that check got lost. So, it's kind of an embarrassing situation, but what I could do for the people was say, hey, I lost the check. Please put a stop payment on that check. And so that way they know that that check cannot be cashed if I found it, if somebody found it, and just write me a new check and make the check for $5 less or whatever the stop payment cost. You go to the bank and you say I want to put a stop payment on that check, and they identify that check and they make that check where it can't be cashed, and they charge you a little something for the effort. So direct deposit, again, you're familiar with that, I'm sure. Fees definitely vary. No interest on most checking accounts, and that's fine. These advertisements of interest on checking accounts usually have a minimum balance associated with them, and it's usually just such a small amount of interest. I'd rather, max perform the account, not worried about it. Now, I don't even know if we talk about these much anymore. That's more of a marketing term. Um, anyway, a interest paying checking account. Savings deposits pay are slightly less liquid. Yeah, why bother? My savings are with say with like a brokerage company where I've got like a money market account or a government securities account or something like that that will pay more than a savings account, yet has that, and also has that separation from the bank. Because I've, when I get a bank statement, it's obviously going to be, sometimes many pages, and it's just a lot to stay on top of in terms of fraud. I mean, you've got to go through it, but just the same, I'd rather look at a brokerage account statement that's a single page with, a few transactions, and any fraud is very easy to detect. Certificates of deposit, talked about this a little bit before. Again, I'm not going to waste a lot of time because I don't think most of you are going to find them that attractive. The interest rates are too low and you have to tie up your money. So I think you can do better. Money market deposit accounts. Less liquid, pays a checking account. So, if I've got accounts with, say, Fidelity and Ameritrade and some of these other brokerage firms, and some of them call them, cash asset management accounts or cash whatever accounts. Usually they're or sometimes they call them money markets, but it's more of a brand name, trade name. Usually what they are is accounts that have a limited amount of transfers per, in or out type things every month. They're not meant to be a regular checking account, and they're usually tied to some sort of government security is the underlying asset, and they're just sort of a parking place. So let's say you were going to buy stocks or mutual funds, something like that. Um, you may want to have money accrue in that money market account and then buy in a certain increment. Or you may find it, getting back to the concept of paying yourself first, you may have a certain, percentage or fixed amount every month go directly into a mutual fund and never go through the money market account. But if you're going to have an emergency fund and you're not going to have it with a bank, if you choose to go the other route and have it with a brokerage firm, you would probably have it in some sort of money market, asset management, whatever they want to call it, some sort of cash type account that isn't going to make a great deal of interest. It's not, it's not a stock type thing. It's not you don't own part of a company, but again, you don't have much in the way of risk, and you've got quite a bit of liquidity, which is good. T-bills, these are the government securities. They're somewhat like CDs that they a lot of times will have maturities over a year or whatever. Um, anyway, federal debt. So, if the U.S. debt fails, it's that's going to be a big deal, and I don't think obviously it shouldn't. So if that were to happen, everything would kind of fail. So anyway, it's viewed as being very safe. So again, the return is not going to be exciting. Money market funds. Here they're getting into some commercial paper, but that just means you know short-term debt by large corporations, slightly higher return, but because they're big companies, they're not expected to fail. But again, these are kind of parking places. These are appropriate places to have money that you're going to do something with in the near future, or have money that you need in an emergency fund that you want access to. But to keep them in here in a long-term investment, um, no, I'd prefer to have those in some sort of investment that's going to mature, or provide a better interest rate. And also, I know some people when they hear the stock market, they get very concerned. So maybe real estate's your thing. Well, you're trying to, keep that money for your next real estate transaction. It might be in a money market fund, you know. All right. They're just throwing out some numbers here. You don't see anybody quoting. I mean, granted, Shopify's killing it, but overall, the portfolio, I mean, people who are in the market have been doing quite well lately. Asset management account, single consolidated, sweep account. This is for, you're selling stock or dividends perhaps, and they're being swept into this account. Anyway, these are all just cash kind of, parking accounts, for lack of a better word. So checking accounts and a different variant of checking account, very liquid. Um, Savings account, again, why? Money market demand account, certificate of deposit, T-bills, um, you know, minimums, and again, the yields are not great. Another money market type, and then asset management, high minimum balance required. I think that's a generalization. I've got an asset management account with literally fractional, less than $1 in it. Every time when I sell, I do a stock purchase program through a company I work for, and I buy shares in the company because I can get them at a discount, but I really don't have any interest in keeping shares in that company. So every quarter I sell all of the shares that I bought the previous quarter, and so I drive that account down to zero, and nothing said. So anyway, but again, am I making huge amounts of money by doing it? No, not really. But if I can buy as an employee, buy the stock at a 10% discount and then sell it the next day at full price, you know, every little bit helps. So, and people, you know, people may have different feelings, but for me, like say somebody who works for General Motors and has stock in General Motors, and I mean, you kind of have all your eggs in one basket. If I was working for General Motors, I don't, but I don't think I'd want stock in General Motors, and I wouldn't want a retirement that's, dependent upon General Motors. I would want to be a little bit more diversified. So that's why I really don't have a lot of interest in keeping stock with the company that I work for. Liquidity. So yeah, I I don't get involved in of this whole sheet here. I've got a money market and a checking account. Credit risk that the buyer may not repay. Interest rate risk. Interest rate risk would be, say you're buying into a 5-year, certificate of deposit. You're committing yourself to that interest rate for 5 years. That's a long time. A lot could happen. And if you have to pull that money out of that 5-year CD, yeah, there's some liquidity there, but if there's a penalty associated with it, um, yeah, that's a converting that back into cash would be a problem. Um, yeah, there's a lot better products out there now. Um, but anyway, what you're looking for is just anything that will provide you a chart. Believe it or not, Yahoo Finances has got pretty good interactive charts, but there's so much more than compared to looking at newspapers and stuff for stock quotes. There's much more powerful sites out there that can give you an interactive chart that's just much more intuitive and imparts a lot more knowledge. Bankrate.com and some of the other competition too has got superior products. Yep. Anyway, you always got to be prepared. A rainy day fund or not getting in over your head. But a lot of this has to do with not um, being overextended in debt. If you're now again not for real estate, but if for your other things, for vehicles, living within your means, and not having a whole bunch of monthly bills based upon depreciating assets, you can weather a storm. Uh, but yeah, I think this is more of a spending problem than a savings problem. Again, things that are perhaps outside of our control. If you set yourself up and you prepare for the worst, if it doesn't happen, you're going to be in a great situation, and you can use that money to, you know, for investments. Now, if the economy is weak, yeah, you might have to retrench a little bit and use that for getting by. But anyway, money markets, because they're short term, may hold commercial paper. Yep. Use remaining funds in a way that will maximize return considering your risk tolerance. I think most people should have some stocks in their portfolio just to get an understanding. And I'm not even saying direct stocks, just perhaps mutual funds, but the amount of wealth that can be created, you know, 10% year over year is just unmatched. I don't know when they've been much higher, to tell you the truth. There was a time where I was investing in short-term bonds and the economy was not doing well, and so these bonds, in order to be competitive, were paying 8%. But those days are over. Um, anyway, what they're trying to show here is, well, anyway, you need to know your situation. You need to have some liquidity, but if you have the mechanisms in place, if you have a checking account established with just a reasonable amount of money in it, if you have a brokerage account established with um, a certain amount in emergency fund there, if you have credit cards that don't have balances, and then you have a regular investment plan that's, say, saving for retirement, where you've got a 401k or something that gives you access to, well, let's say you got 50 grand in there, gives you access to a $25,000 loan against that account that you can have within a week. You're going to be doing fine. So that's what you're kind of striving for. One option. So, um, company like Fidelity, again, I'm not shilling for these guys, but they're one of the bigger companies. They would have everything in terms of mutual funds, retirements, brokerage type stuff, exchange traded funds. If you want to get cosmic and have some fun money in options and sectors, cash management, credit cards, 529s, annuities. They'll even do insurance, advice on charitable giving. You can go to one of these sites, and if you're smart, working on your term project, you can find a lot of the information that you need, and it's valuable. It's You can do screenshots of some of the charts that they will generate for you. Now, in this case, obviously I was logged in, but you can establish an account with one of these guys, or maybe you already have an account established with whoever. I mean, there's a lot of pretty good companies involved in this stuff. Vanguard and Fidelity and Ameritrade, and just a lot of big names. And most of their sites all have the same sort of resources available to you. So Vanguard, another one. Calculators and tools. Some of those financial problems we're talking about. This would be more involved stuff. A little bit on taxes, emergency funds, college. You don't necessarily need to get with an advisor, but they are after folks like you in the college area. You all may not have a lot of money at this point, but this is where they build brand loyalty. Beer companies or whatever company, they advertise to your demographic because they know that buying habits are established, at your stage in life. The guy in his 50s who, you know, drinks beer every day and, smokes cigarettes or whatever, the amount of money and marketing effort it would take to get that consumer to change his habits is phenomenal, and you might not even be successful. But if you can get new consumers, you know, college students to set up their habits early in life where they're still malleable, that's why they're the you know you are the target. So all these sites are going to be set towards you, and that they may have very low minimal balances because they know if they can get you as a customer, there may not be much money in it for them now, but when you get into your career and have some substantial money, if you've got a relationship established with them, you're probably going to continue, and that's what they're looking for. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little about the term project. There's certain aspects of it you might not be able to start right now because we haven't like talked much about life insurance or things like that. You could probably get a lot of good information from other sites, but anyway, there are some things though that you can talk about, can work. The goal of the project, it's not supposed to be like a checklist, but there's a lot of things that you should sort of address. And again, the way this thing is set up is I'm don't want to know your personal data. Don't necessarily don't put your personal data in the report, but it is most useful for you though to say somebody pretty similar to yourself, or similar to your situation, right? In your situation right now, this always gets confusing, where I talk in here about setting it up for uh, 4 to 5 years down the road or whatever, to where you're out of college and immersed in your career. So at best, you're just sort of forecasting where you will be at a certain point. Um, Now, some of you may, you know, be non-traditional students, maybe working full time, and so you already may be in that part of your career. But again, don't put down, a bunch of your own, sensitive personal details, but do try to, say whatever Bob, this guy who, oh, by the way, plans to have kids or no kids, plans to send his kids to college, plans to do whatever. The more closely that aligns with your own goals, the more useful it can be to yourself. Um, so college loans, talked about some of the vehicles for saving. Um, Social Security, you can go to the Social Security site. They'll tell you basically, what you would get. And again, this is more of a awareness to realize that probably not what you want to be completely relying on. Life insurance is a temporary thing. When you're young and when you're really young, you don't need life insurance. When you're youngish and you have kids and a new house and all, you need all kinds of insurance because, if you checked out at that point in your life, it would be a financial mess. But as you get older, the house is paid off, kids have gone to school, insurance starts getting expensive because you're getting older, and you know you don't need life insurance at that point. Anyway, that gets kind of opinionated, and I kind of told you how I feel about it, but you may have your own feelings, but it's I'm not alone. It's a fairly logical choice, although not at all popular with the salesman who wants you to buy insurance from him. But anyway, it's should be viewed as a temporary need. How you're going to invest, um, I did my best tonight to try and tell you that saving in a bank is not going to do it for you. But anyway, um, use your own judgment and your own risk tolerance, and don't forget about real estate. Um, is there a pension plan? Is there some sort of military retirement? Is there some sort of union retirement? That's going to change things certainly. Um, Tax deferred compensation, most definitely going to be part for just about everybody because there's usually a match plan. You get 2% of your income, for example, and your employer will match 3. If you don't do that, you're getting paid 3% less for really no good reason. Um, Whoops. Anyway, so all this stuff is repeated, and I think I over repeated it in the syllabus, but anyway, better twice than not at all. But start thinking about that. Again, the format's very, very flexible. Whatever works for you. If I have foreign students sometimes. I have other students who are like, my situation's completely unique. Well, do something that's useful for you. And if it makes sense and it meets the, 4 to 5 page requirement and you put some time into it and you actually have a plan that will, work for you and not just for this class, then, you'll typically get a good grade on it. So the homework, three real world banking situations. So that's obviously not addressed in the book. Um, yep. Yeah, so we're looking for probably about a half a page or whatever to explain, why you're deciding to stay at whatever bank you're at or whatever. Yeah, again, I'm not trying to get you to switch banks, but I think you will find that there are some differences amongst the banks, and make sure you've got the bank um, that's best for you, and not just the bank that you're have a habit of going to. Anyway, that's it for tonight.